Welcome back to Think Like a Nurse 2. Today we're going to be talking about laboratory values that are associated with clients that have problems with their kidneys or with renal disorders. We had talked about in previous lectures about urinalysis and also urine culture and sensitivity, which are pretty basic labs that are used to diagnose a client with a urinary tract infection or simple bladder infection. But these particular labs actually tell us much more in detail about the actual function of the kidney and what specifically may be going on with our client metabolically. Okay, the first we're going to talk about is BUN, blood urea nitrogen. So I want you to remember this. BUN, B-U-N, is a three-letter word. DRY is a three-letter word. So when the BUN is high, the client is dry. So when a client is dry, we actually have to rehydrate them, usually with IV fluids. It's usually going to be difficult for them to be able to take in enough fluids by mouth to try to recover those lab values. But when we're looking at acute care, we're looking at rehydrating them as per healthcare providers' orders with some of our primary or basic IV fluids. And then in a regular setting or a non-acute care setting, the client may be on forced fluids or push PO fluids, such as water and other beverages to help the client become rehydrated. And then labs may be rechecked to determine if there is an improvement in that BUN. So BUN is high, client is dry. Okay, next we're going to be talking about our creatinine. Your creatinine is a very good indicator of exactly how the kidneys themselves are functioning. The creatinine actually is produced as proteins break down, ammonia, nitrates, those kind of things. And so your creatinine is actually going to tell you much more about the actual functional unit of the kidney itself. So if we've got a client that has an elevated BUN, remember we said we just are more so along the thought or train of thought that the client may be dehydrated and we need to rehydrate them. When we start looking at an elevation of the BUN and the creatinine together, this becomes much more significant, and we're looking at possible damage to the kidney, or that the client may need more than just rehydration. So what we're going to be looking at next is called our GFR, and that is your glomerular filtration rate. And the glomerulus is actually where the urine is produced in the kidney. So the filtration, it's doing exactly what it says it does. It's determining how long or how quickly the urine can be formed and filtered and processed to be excreted as waste within that functional unit of the glomerulus. Okay, so when we're looking at a GFR, we want our GFR ideally to be 80 or above, and that's a normally, healthily functioning kidney. When we start dropping below that, say down to 60, we're looking at different stages of renal disease. Okay, and it can go down as low as end-stage renal. It can be a pre-renal stage before we get to this 60, or we're right about that level. And then we start grading down. As the lower the GFR goes, the more headed towards end-stage renal decline is. So what we're really looking at is if we get into our levels like around 40s, 30s, lower. I've even seen a our glomerular filtration rate go down as low as 8. When we're in those particular stages, we're looking at clients that have chronic renal failure, and especially when they're low around the 8-10 range, then they are in end-stage renal disease. So this means that they cannot actually reverse what's already happened to the kidneys. The kidneys are pretty much kaput because they've done all the work that they can do, and they're no longer able to function appropriately like they should, which will lead us into our next lecture, and that's going to be talking about the different kinds of dialysis. So whenever we're looking at the GFR and our BUN and our creatinine, when we're looking at those, especially looking at that GFR, I want your brain to automatically start focusing on, oh my, does my patient need peritoneal dialysis, or does my client need hemodialysis? So when we're looking at those lab values and we're finding things that are abnormal, we need to be thinking about, does my client actually show that physical presentation? Is there an indication that my client is going to need further function or further work? Because when we talk about dialysis a little bit in our next lecture, a little bit later, it's going to tell us that those particular processes are actually doing the work for the kidneys themselves. Okay, next we're going to talk about the specific gravity of the urine. Interestingly enough, in a client that has healthy kidneys, we would expect them to have a fairly normal range GFR. Okay, usually the range is 1.001 to 1.029, depending upon the resource that you're using. So just again, go back to the resource that you've been instructed to use as far as reference, or whatever your facility protocol has there that you refer to. But when we're looking at that number going closer to the 1.001 level or lower, then we're looking at that urine being very dilute. And that's what happens to clients that have chronic kidney disorders. Their urine becomes much more dilute. When they're in end-stage renal disease, we talked about the nephrons, we talked about the glomeruli, the filtration process that should normally take place, and those kidneys are no longer able to filter, and therefore that specific gravity of that urine is going to be much lower. When we're looking at higher or closer to normal specific gravities, then we're looking at the urine containing sediment, containing toxins, those products that are supposed to be filtered out of the blood. So we think about the whatever's excreted. If it goes into the potty, then that means that the kidneys are functioning normally. If it does not, and it goes back through the circulatory system, then we know that there is a problem and that the blood is being contaminated because the body cannot actually excrete the waste as urine. So when we think about a low specific gravity, we think about clients that have very dilute urine, and that those clients are nearing end-stage renal disease if they are already not in end-stage renal disease. Next, we're going to be talking about our 24-hour urine for creatinine clearance. This again is very significant, and instructing your clients on how to do a 24-hour urine. You as a nurse, or functioning in the role of a nurse, should actually take the urine. It should be placed on ice. It's going to be collected for 24 hours. Your first void or first urine is going to be discarded. That time is going to be recorded, however, and then your bucket or your collection jug will be placed on ice, and from that point until 24 hours are up, that urine will be collected, kept on ice, and then will be sent to the lab to determine a creatinine clearance. So this is very, very important when we're determining the actual function of the urine and kidney itself. So this is a great indicator of whether or not the client actually has a true functional problem, and maybe one of the first steps that are involved in actually diagnosing the client with a kidney problem. Well, I hope you've learned a lot from today's lecture, and I hope that you'll stay tuned with us for our next lecture, which is going to talk more in detail about other disorders of the kidney and other functional problems of the kidney. Thank you.